Hello everyone, and welcome back to Snoozing Scientist. Tonight, we're going to drift into a field at dawn, into a world so small and so familiar that we almost forget how extraordinary it is. We're going to explore the secret intelligence of bees. Before we begin, take a slow breath. And if you'd like, leave a comment below and tell us where you're listening from tonight. Somewhere near you, whether in a city park, a rural meadow, or a balcony garden. Bees are moving through the air, working quietly, shaping the world in ways most of us never notice. Now imagine the meadow. The light is soft. Dew clings to the edges of petals. The air is cool and still. And then, almost without sound, a bee lifts off from a flower. To us, it is a small motion. To the bee, it is navigation. Bees are not drifting randomly through fields. They are calculating. They are sensing ultraviolet patterns invisible to human eyes. Many flowers reflect ultraviolet light in distinct bullseye shapes that guide bees toward nectar. What looks to us like a uniform yellow petal is, to a bee, a mapped landing strip. Inside that small brain, smaller than a grain of rice, there are nearly 1 million neurons. That number may seem modest compared to the human brain's billions, but neuron count does not tell the whole story. What matters is wiring efficiency. A bee's nervous system is specialized for spatial mapping, odor detection, motion processing, and time perception. When a forager bee leaves the hive, it memorizes landmarks. It notes the angle of the sun relative to the horizon. It measures distance not in meters, but in optic flow, the speed at which the landscape moves across its compound eyes. Distance becomes a visual calculation. Time becomes part of navigation. Because bees possess an internal clock. If a bee finds nectar in the morning, it can return to that location the next day at roughly the same time, even if the sun has shifted across the sky. It compensates for the sun's movement using circadian rhythms, internal biological oscillators that track the passage of time. This is not simple instinct. It is integration, vision, memory, timing, all working together in a brain no larger than a sesame seed. When the bee returns to the hive, something remarkable happens. Inside the dark interior of the colony, the forager begins to dance. The waggle dance is not metaphorical. It is literal communication. The bee moves in a figure-8 pattern, with a straight waggle run in the center. The angle of that waggle run relative to gravity encodes the angle of the nectar source relative to the sun. If the bee waggles at 30 degrees to the right of vertical, it means the food lies 30 degrees to the right of the sun's position. The duration of the waggle conveys distance. Longer waggles mean farther flights. Shorter ones mean closer rewards. Other bees gather around, touching the dancer with their antennae, sensing vibrations, detecting scent clues from pollen carried on the dancer's body. From that dance alone, recruits can leave the hive and fly directly toward a resource they have never seen. They do not receive GPS coordinates. They receive a vector, direction and magnitude, encoded in motion. This communication system is so precise that scientists have decoded it mathematically. It is a biological language of angles and durations, a symbolic system rooted in geometry. And yet it unfolds in darkness. No audience. No applause. just collective survival. Inside the hive, intelligence shifts from individual to collective. A single bee can navigate and communicate. But the colony operates as a distributed system, something closer to a neural network than a hierarchy. There is no central commander. The queen does not issue orders. Her primary role is reproduction. The coordination of labor emerges from local interactions, pheromones, vibrations, food exchange, temperature signals. If the hive overheats, workers begin fanning their wings in coordinated airflow patterns. They regulate temperature with remarkable precision, maintaining brood areas around 34 to 36 degrees Celsius. This thermal stability is critical for larval development. In cold conditions, bees cluster tightly and generate heat by vibrating their flight muscles without flying. The cluster expands and contracts dynamically to preserve warmth. It behaves like a living organ, adjusting shape to regulate energy. Architecture within the hive reveals another layer of efficiency. Honeycomb is built from beeswax secreted by workers. The cells form hexagons, a shape that has fascinated mathematicians for centuries. The hexagonal grid maximizes storage space while minimizing material use. No other tiling pattern encloses equal areas with less perimeter. For centuries, it was debated whether bees consciously knew geometry. Modern physics suggests something subtler. Bees initially build circular cells. As wax softens from body heat and neighboring cells press together, surface tension naturally pulls the walls into hexagonal shapes, the most energy-efficient configuration. What appears as design may be physics guiding instinct. Yet the result is architectural perfection. Bees also process nectar through enzymatic transformation. Honey is not simply collected sugar. It is chemically altered. Enzymes such as invertase break sucrose into glucose and fructose. Water is evaporated through wing fanning until moisture content drops low enough to prevent microbial growth. Honey becomes antimicrobial, stable, long-lasting. Archaeologists have found pots of honey in ancient tombs thousands of years old, still preserved. Within the hive, information spreads through trophallaxis, the exchange of food mouth to mouth. But this exchange is not merely nutritional. Chemical signals, hormones, and colony-level cues travel through shared fluids. The hive is an organism made of organisms. When it must choose a new nesting site, during swarming, the scout bees explore potential cavities. Each scout returns and performs a waggle dance advocating for its preferred location. Multiple options are proposed simultaneously. Through repeated dances and recruitment, support builds around superior sites. Over time, consensus emerges. Not because one bee commands it, but because evidence accumulates. It is democratic. It is iterative. It resembles how neurons accumulate signals until a threshold is reached and a decision is triggered. Swarm intelligence is not metaphorical. It is measurable. Even navigation extends into physics. Bees detect polarized light patterns in the sky, invisible to humans, allowing them to orient even when clouds obscure the sun. Some evidence suggests sensitivity to Earth's magnetic field may also assist navigation. There are even hypotheses exploring quantum effects in magnetoception, though research remains ongoing and cautious. Still, it is astonishing. A creature weighing less than a gram reads the sky like a compass. And beyond intelligence, bees shape entire ecosystems. Roughly 1/3 of global crop production depends on pollinators. Almonds, apples, blueberries, cucumbers, many vegetables, all rely heavily on bee pollination. Their movement transfers pollen between flowers, enabling fertilization and fruit development. The quiet hum of wings becomes agriculture. The geometry of the dance becomes food security. And yet, their system is fragile. Pesticides, habitat fragmentation, parasites such as the varroa mite, and climate shifts all stress colonies. Colony collapse disorder revealed how delicate the balance is. When foragers fail to return, the network destabilizes. The hive empties. Intelligence alone does not guarantee resilience against large-scale disruption, which makes their existence even more remarkable. Because despite vulnerability, they persist. Across continents, across climates, adapting continuously. And now, as the meadow grows quieter in your imagination, the hum softens. The bee lands again on a flower. Ultraviolet patterns guide it inward. Nectar flows into its crop. It lifts off once more, carrying microscopic grains of pollen on branched hairs. Small motions, large consequences. Inside that tiny body, neurons fire. Muscles adjust. Sun angle is calculated. Time is measured. The hive waits in darkness. And intelligence, quiet, distributed, mathematical, continues its work. Not loudly, not consciously, but precisely. As your breathing slows now, imagine the field again at dawn. Imagine the first bee lifting into cool air. Imagine the unseen geometry guiding its flight. The world is full of minds we do not recognize as minds. Full of systems we mistake for simplicity. And beneath the hum of wings, beneath the sunlight and flowers, something deeply structured unfolds. Calm. Efficient. Alive. Imagine holding a bee gently in your palm. You wouldn't see it, of course. Not without magnification, but inside that tiny head, behind compound eyes and delicate antennae, sits a brain weighing less than a milligram. It is no larger than a sesame seed. And yet, inside it, patterns unfold that rival complex computation. A bee brain contains just under 1 million neurons. Compared to the human brain's roughly 86 billion, it sounds insignificant. But neuron number alone does not define intelligence. What matters is how those neurons are arranged and how efficiently they communicate. The bee brain is compact, highly specialized, and astonishingly efficient. One of its most important structures is called the mushroom body, a region responsible for learning, memory, and sensory integration. Despite its whimsical name, the mushroom body is a dense cluster of neurons that receives input from the bee senses, vision, smell, taste. When a bee learns to associate a particular floral scent with nectar reward, synaptic connections inside the mushroom body strengthen. Electrical signals pass through neural circuits that encode the odor. If the scent leads to a sweet reward, dopamine-like neuromodulators reinforce those circuits. Learning is not abstract. It is chemical. It is electrical. It is structural. In laboratory experiments, bees have been trained to distinguish between patterns, colors, and even abstract concepts. They can learn to recognize human faces in simplified image tests. They can solve simple puzzles to access sugar rewards. They can remember which flowers were previously depleted and avoid returning too soon. All of this emerges from neural circuits measured in microns. Vision in bees is particularly fascinating. Their compound eyes consist of thousands of armatidia, tiny visual units that each detect a small portion of the world. Instead of forming a single image like human eyes, bees perceive a mosaic of visual fragments. Their visual processing is tuned for motion detection and contrast rather than fine detail. They see ultraviolet light. Many flowers display patterns in ultraviolet wavelengths that guide bees toward nectar-rich centers. These patterns are invisible to us but vividly clear to them. Inside the optic lobes of the bee brain, motion-sensitive neurons respond to changes in light patterns. When a bee flies forward, the rate at which the landscape moves across its field of vision, known as optic flow, helps it estimate distance traveled. This calculation requires constant neural integration of speed and visual change. Distance becomes a neural computation. Time becomes an internal rhythm. Bees also exhibit something extraordinary. They can form long-term memories lasting days or even weeks. After repeated exposure to a rewarding flower type, neural plasticity strengthens certain pathways. Proteins are synthesized. Synapses grow more efficient. Memory consolidates. Even sleep plays a role. Yes, bees sleep. Worker bees exhibit periods of reduced movement and responsiveness that resemble sleep-like states. Studies show that sleep deprivation impairs their ability to perform the waggle dance accurately. Distance encoding becomes less precise. Navigation suffers. Sleep supports neural consolidation, even in a brain so small. Within the bee brain, neurotransmitters similar to those in mammals regulate behavior. Octopamine, analogous to norepinephrine, modulates arousal and reward. Dopamine influences learning. Serotonin affects mood-like states. The chemistry is ancient. Across evolution, similar molecular tools appear again and again in nervous systems of vastly different sizes. Perhaps most astonishing is how bees handle spatial mapping. Though they lack a hippocampus, the structure mammals use for spatial memory, bees possess neural circuits that encode vector information. They integrate sun position, internal clocks, visual landmarks, and motion cues to generate navigation decisions. Some researchers describe this as path integration, a neural process that continuously updates an internal estimate of position relative to a starting point. And all of it happens inside a brain that weighs less than a drop of rain. But intelligence in bees is not confined to individuals. Their neural circuits are tuned for cooperation. A bee's brain evolved not for solitary survival but for participation in a colony. Its learning, memory, and communication serve the hive. Individual intelligence feeds collective intelligence. The mushroom bodies process sensory input. Motor neurons guide flight muscles. Optic lobes decode visual information. Antennal lobes analyze scent. All interconnected in a dense, efficient network. It is not complexity through size. It is complexity through precision. Even aging in bees is linked to neural function. Worker bees begin life performing tasks inside the hive, cleaning cells, feeding larvae. As they age, they transition to foraging roles. This shift is accompanied by changes in gene expression and neural circuitry. The brain itself adapts. Behavioral role shapes neural structure. The hive is not static. Neither is the brain. And perhaps this is the most profound realization. Intelligence does not require vast scale. It requires integration. Sensation feeding memory. Memory guiding movement. Movement feeding communication. Communication shaping collective behavior. As you lie here now, imagine the interior of a bee brain illuminated softly, tiny electrical impulses traveling along microscopic pathways, chemical messengers drifting across synapses, patterns strengthening with experience. It is not silent in there. It is alive with activity. Small sparks. Constant calculation. Subtle adaptation. And yet the bee flies calmly across a meadow, unaware of the equations unfolding inside its own head. Its brain does not question. It simply processes. Efficiently. Elegantly. Without ego. As the hum fades in your imagination and the bee returns to the hive, that tiny brain settles into rest. Neural activity slows. Memory consolidates. The colony continues. The field grows quiet. The sun lowers. And within that small head, smaller than a fingernail, intelligence rests, ready to awaken with the next dawn. Inside the hive, in the dim warmth of wax walls and humming wings, something subtle is happening in the nursery chambers. Eggs laid by the queen rest inside hexagonal cells. Each egg is genetically almost identical. If you were to examine their DNA, you would find no grand difference separating one future worker from one future queen. And yet, within days, their destinies diverge completely. One larva will grow into a sterile worker, smaller, shorter-lived, tasked with cleaning, building, foraging, defending. Another, fed differently, will become a queen, larger, fertile, capable of laying thousands of eggs per day, living years instead of weeks. The difference is not written in the genes. It is written in the chemistry. From the moment larvae hatch, they are fed a substance secreted from the hypopharyngeal glands of young worker bees. This milky secretion is called royal jelly. At first, all larvae receive it. But only one, or a few potential candidates, will continue receiving royal jelly exclusively and in abundance. And this diet alone changes everything. Royal jelly is not simply food. It is biochemical instruction. It contains proteins, sugars, lipids, vitamins, and a remarkable fatty acid known as 10-hydroxy-2-decanoic acid, or 10-HDA. It contains rhyolactin, a protein believed to influence growth pathways. It contains epigenetic modulators, molecules that do not alter DNA sequences but affect how genes are expressed. This is where it becomes almost unbelievable. Worker bees and queen bees share the same genetic blueprint. But royal jelly alters gene expression through epigenetic mechanisms. Specifically, it influences DNA methylation, the process by which methyl groups attach to DNA and regulate which genes are turned on or off. When larvae are fed continuous royal jelly, certain genes associated with growth, ovary development, longevity, and reproductive capability are activated. Other genes are suppressed. The genome remains the same, but its expression changes dramatically. From one chemical input, the queen grows larger. Her ovaries fully develop. Her lifespan extends dramatically, sometimes 20 times longer than that of a worker. Her pheromones influence the behavior of the entire colony. All from diet. All from molecules. This is not magic. It is epigenetics, the study of how environmental inputs influence gene activity. Royal jelly effectively rewires developmental pathways. It alters hormonal signaling, particularly through pathways involving juvenile hormone and insulin-like growth factors. These biochemical cascades shift the larva's growth trajectory. Imagine that. Inside a tiny cell, proteins bind to DNA. Gene networks activate. Cell division accelerates. Tissues develop differently. All because of what was consumed. The hive does not assign queens by hierarchy. It feeds them into existence. And even more fascinating, if a queen dies, the colony can create a new one. Worker bees select young larvae and begin feeding them exclusively royal jelly. Within days, the transformation begins. Caste is flexible early in development. Plastic. Responsive. This reveals something profound about biology. Genes are not destiny. They are potential. An environment. In this case, nutrition guides that potential toward specific outcomes. Royal jelly also contains antimicrobial peptides that protect developing queens. It shapes the microbiome of the larva. It supports rapid cellular growth. The queen's body becomes metabolically different from workers. Her reproductive organs develop extensively. Her brain architecture shifts slightly. Even her behavior changes. She does not forage, does not build, does not clean. Her physiology is specialized entirely for reproduction and pheromone production. Her pheromones suppress ovary development in workers. Chemistry maintains order. Chemistry regulates hierarchy. Chemistry shapes destiny. And yet, the system is dynamic. If the queen weakens, pheromone levels drop. Workers detect the chemical change. They respond. New queens are raised. It is not political. It is molecular. The hive senses shifts through chemical gradients and adjusts accordingly. Even aging in queens is influenced by royal jelly's continued consumption. Workers transition to different tasks as they age and their hormone levels change. Queens, however, are continuously nourished in a way that maintains reproductive dominance and longevity. Longevity, here, is not just genetics. It is sustained biochemical support. Imagine now the nursery chamber again, soft wax walls, larvae floating in milky pools of royal jelly. Invisible molecular messages flowing into cells. DNA strands coiled tightly inside nuclei. Enzymes attaching methyl groups, removing them, adjusting transcription. Tiny chemical switches deciding whether an ovary will develop. Whether a body will grow larger. Whether life will last weeks or years. The intelligence of the hive extends not only to dance and architecture, but to developmental engineering. It is a biochemical society. Genes waiting for instruction. Food delivering fate. And as you lie here now, breathing slowly, imagine those nursery cells glowing softly in the dark interior of the hive. Imagine molecules drifting gently into developing bodies, activating pathways older than human civilization. No speeches. No commands. Just nutrition shaping life. It is humbling to realize how much of biology rests not on rigid blueprints, but on flexible responses. The queen is not born different. She is fed different. And through chemistry, a role emerges. As the hive hums quietly, and royal jelly continues to flow from worker glands into waiting larvae, the cycle repeats, ancient, precise, adaptive. Molecules guiding destiny. Softly. Silently. Inside the hive, long before honey is stored or larvae are raised, something else takes shape. Something so precise that for centuries it puzzled mathematicians. The honeycomb. If you were to cut open a hive and look closely at the wax structure inside, you would see an endless field of hexagons. Each cell perfectly tiled against its neighbors. No gaps. No wasted space. It looks intentional. It looks engineered. And in a way, it is. But not in the way we might first imagine. The hexagon has fascinated mathematicians for thousands of years. Among all possible shapes that can tile a plane without leaving gaps, triangles, squares, hexagons, the hexagon encloses the greatest area with the least perimeter. In simpler terms, if you want to store the most honey while using the least wax, the hexagon is the most efficient shape. This is known as the honeycomb conjecture, formally proven in 1999, though suspected since ancient Greek times. The conjecture states that regular hexagons provide the most efficient way to partition a surface into regions of equal area with minimal total boundary length. Bees, somehow, have been solving this optimization problem for millions of years. But here's where it becomes even more fascinating. Bees do not start by building hexagons. They begin with circles. When worker bees secrete wax from glands on their abdomen, they chew and shape it into roughly circular cells. These circular forms are pressed next to one another inside the warm hive. As the wax softens from body heat, surface tension takes over. Imagine soap bubbles pressed together in a cluster. The walls between them flatten where they meet. Circular boundaries compress into straight edges. The natural physics of minimizing energy transforms adjacent circles into hexagonal boundaries. It is not conscious geometry. It is physics guiding instinct. The wax behaves like a viscous fluid when warm. Adjacent circular depressions push against one another. The most energy-efficient configuration under compression becomes a six-sided structure. The result appears mathematical, but it emerges from simple rules. Build circles. Let physics refine them. Still, the geometry goes deeper. The cells are not simple tubes. Each honeycomb cell has a base composed of 3 rhombus-shaped panels that meet in a pyramid-like structure. This trihedral base is angled in such a way that it maximizes storage volume while minimizing wax use. For centuries, mathematicians debated whether bees knew these angles. In the 18th century, scientists measured the angles of the rhombi forming the base of honeycomb cells and found them astonishingly close to the mathematically optimal angle for minimizing material. Later experiments showed that when bees build comb under different gravitational conditions, the structure adjusts slightly. Gravity influences how wax flows and settles. Again, physics and biology intertwine. The hive interior is warm, often around 35 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, beeswax becomes pliable. When bees cluster around newly formed comb, their collective body heat softens the wax just enough for surface tension to smooth imperfections. Geometry is refined not by intention, but by temperature and pressure. And yet the result is astonishingly consistent. A honeycomb is strong. Its repeating hexagonal grid distributes force efficiently. It resists bending and collapse. It supports the weight of honey, which can be heavy, without wasting structural material. Architects and engineers have borrowed this design repeatedly. Honeycomb structures appear in aerospace panels, packaging materials, and lightweight construction systems. The pattern is timeless. But beyond efficiency, there is something poetic in its repetition. Hexagon beside hexagon. Wall meeting wall. Order emerging from warmth and crowding. Inside the hive, thousands of workers coordinate comb construction without blueprints. They respond to local cues, neighboring wax walls, gravity, pheromones. Each bee adjusts its position slightly in response to others. No single bee oversees the whole structure. Yet collectively, they produce a nearly flawless tessellation. This is distributed construction. Local rules generating global order. Even the orientation of the comb is deliberate. Cells tilt slightly upward, about 13 degrees from horizontal, to prevent honey from dripping out before it is capped. The hive is not static architecture. It is living geometry. As honey is stored, capped, consumed, and replenished, the comb remains. It expands outward gradually, layer by layer. Imagine standing inside that warm interior. The low hum of wings vibrating through wax. Hexagons stretching in every direction. Shadows shifting across repeating patterns. The structure feels almost infinite. Almost like a mathematical landscape. And yet it is built from something as simple as secreted wax, shaped by mouthparts and body heat. The hexagon is not chosen for beauty. It is chosen by efficiency. And efficiency, in nature, often appears beautiful. As you rest now, imagine the comb glowing softly in the dark hive. Imagine the repeating six-sided cells stretching outward like a mosaic of golden light. Tiny adjustments. Tiny pressures. Warmth shaping wax. Geometry emerging from instinct. The bees do not calculate equations. They follow rules. They respond to neighbors. They build circles. And the universe shapes them into hexagons. Perhaps that is the quietest intelligence of all, not conscious design, but alignment with physical law. And as your breathing slows, you can picture that repeating pattern beneath the hum of wings, stable, efficient, balanced. Hexagon after hexagon. Order from warmth. Structure from cooperation. Mathematics made of wax. There comes a moment in the life of a hive when it becomes too full. The air inside grows warm and dense. Workers crowd the comb. The queen's pheromones, once concentrated and steady, begin to dilute as the colony expands. Something shifts, not dramatically, not loudly, but chemically. And when that shift reaches a threshold, the hive prepares to divide. Half the colony will leave. Thousands of bees pour out of the entrance in a sudden cloud, swirling upward into the sky like a living storm. For a moment, the swarm looks chaotic, a drifting mass of wings and motion. But it is not chaos. It is transition. The bees cluster temporarily on a tree branch or fence post, forming a dense, pulsing sphere around the queen. From the outside, it appears like a hanging, breathing organism. Inside, something extraordinary is beginning. Scouts. A small percentage of experienced foragers break away from the cluster and begin searching for a new home. They explore hollow trees, cavities in rocks, abandoned spaces large enough to shelter the colony. Each scout returns to the swarm and performs a waggle dance on the surface of the clustered bees. Just like in foraging, the dance encodes direction and distance. But this time, it advertises real estate. Multiple scouts may advocate for different sites at once. One dances for a hollow oak tree 50 meters to the north. Another dances for a cavity in a nearby wall. Another suggests a space deeper in the forest. At first, the dances compete. The swarm surface becomes a marketplace of proposals. But here is where swarm intelligence reveals itself. The quality of the site influences the vigor of the dance. A scout that finds a spacious, dry cavity with a small entrance, ideal conditions, will dance longer and more enthusiastically. The intensity of the dance recruits more scouts to inspect that same site. Those recruits visit the site independently. They evaluate it. And if they agree it is suitable, they return and begin dancing for it too. Gradually, support builds. Inferior sites lose momentum as fewer bees advocate for them. The swarm does not vote with ballots. It votes with dance duration, with repetition, with recruitment. Over time, the swarm approaches consensus. Not because one bee commands it, but because evidence accumulates through decentralized evaluation. Once a quorum of bees gathers at the preferred site, often around 15 to 20 scouts present simultaneously, something shifts again. Signal changes. Bees begin producing piping sounds. The swarm prepares for lift-off. And suddenly, as if directed by a single mind, thousands of bees take flight together and travel directly to the chosen location. It feels coordinated. But no central leader gives the order. The decision emerged from distributed processing. Each scout followed simple rules. Explore. Evaluate. Report honestly. Recruit proportionally to quality. And from those local behaviors, a global decision formed. Mathematicians and computer scientists have studied this process closely. It resembles algorithms used in distributed computing and robotics. In fact, swarm intelligence models inspired by bees are used to optimize traffic flow, network routing, and even problem-solving in artificial intelligence. Bees are not just building hives. They are demonstrating consensus building without hierarchy. Even more fascinating is that dissent is allowed. multiple sites can remain under consideration for hours or even days. Competition persists until enough support consolidates around the best option. The system avoids premature convergence on poor choices. In neuroscience, similar threshold mechanisms exist in decision-making circuits of the brain. Neurons accumulate input signals until activity crosses a firing threshold. In swarms, dances accumulate support until a quorum threshold is reached. The parallels are striking. A brain is a network of neurons. A swarm is a network of bees. Both rely on distributed signaling. Both reach decisions without a single master controller. And yet, the swarm is not conscious. It does not reflect. It does not debate. It follows rules embedded in biology. And still, the outcome is remarkably effective. As you imagine that hanging cluster of bees now, thousands of bodies clinging together on a tree branch, imagine the subtle vibrations traveling across the surface. Scouts dancing. Antennae touching. Wings shifting slightly in response. The swarm feels like a single organism. But it is not singular. It is many. Many acting in coordination. Many contributing fragments of information. Many forming something larger than themselves. Perhaps that is what intelligence looks like when scaled differently. Not centralized. Not dominated. But emergent. Quietly. Systematically. And as your breathing slows, picture the moment the swarm finally lifts. The cluster dissolves into motion. Thousands of bees rise together and move in one direction, not randomly, but guided by a shared decision. A new home awaits. No king declared it. No command was issued. The decision simply formed. And the hive moved. If you step outside in spring, before the air grows too warm, you may hear it, that low, steady hum drifting between flowers. It sounds small, almost delicate. And yet, within that hum rests one of the most powerful ecological forces on the planet. Bees pollinate nearly 3/4 of the world's flowering plants and about 1/3 of the crops humans eat. Apples, almonds, blueberries, cucumbers, pumpkins, coffee, all depend, in part, on pollination by insects, and bees are among the most efficient pollinators in existence. When a bee lands on a flower, pollen grains cling to the tiny branched hairs covering its body. As it moves to the next bloom, some of that pollen transfers to the flower's reproductive structures, enabling fertilization. Seeds form. Fruit develops. Life continues. It is quiet work. Invisible, unless you look closely. Without bees, many ecosystems would not collapse overnight, but they would slowly unravel. Fewer seeds. Fewer fruits. Fewer plants. Fewer animals that depend on those plants. Food webs thin. Diversity shrinks. Pollination is not just agriculture. It is biodiversity. It is the rhythm of forests regenerating, meadows blooming, deserts flowering after rain. And yet, bees face pressures unlike any they have encountered in their evolutionary history. Habitat loss removes wildflowers and nesting sites. Monoculture farming reduces floral diversity, forcing bees to rely on a single crop for weeks at a time. Pesticides, particularly certain systemic insecticides, can interfere with navigation and neural signaling. Parasites such as var.OA mites weaken colonies and transmit viruses. The stresses accumulate. Colony health declines. And when bee populations decline, the ripple spreads outward. But there is something calming and empowering about knowing that protection begins small. Planting native flowers creates forage corridors. Even a small garden, a balcony planter, or a patch of wild growth can provide nectar and pollen. Native plants are especially valuable because local bee species evolved alongside them. Reducing pesticide use, especially during blooming periods, lowers unintended harm. Supporting diversified farming practices helps create landscapes that sustain pollinators year-round. Leaving small patches of soil undisturbed allows ground-nesting bees, which make up a large portion of bee species, to build their homes. Because not all bees live in hives. Many are solitary. Many live quietly in soil, hollow stems, or wood. Their work is just as important. There is also a deeper way bees benefit Earth, beyond crops and flowers. By pollinating diverse plants, they help maintain genetic variation within plant populations. This diversity strengthens ecosystems against disease, climate shifts, and environmental stress. Pollination increases resilience. Resilience sustains life. Even honey itself reflects environmental health. The composition of honey varies depending on local flora. It is, in a sense, a botanical map of a region. Bees are indicators. When their numbers decline, it often signals broader ecological imbalance. But when landscapes bloom with wildflowers and bees return in abundance, it signals restoration. Imagine now a field alive with motion, bees moving from bloom to bloom, sunlight catching the fine hairs on their bodies. Each visit subtle. Each transfer of pollen small. And yet across thousands of visits, thousands of flowers, entire ecosystems shift toward renewal. The work is quiet. The benefit immense. As you rest now, think about the fragility of that hum and its strength. A creature with a brain smaller than a grain of rice helping sustain forests, farms, and fruit trees. A society of wax architects and nectar gatherers shaping the food systems of continents. Protecting bees does not require grand gestures. It requires awareness. Small adjustments. Planting. Patience. A willingness to let parts of the world grow a little wilder. And perhaps that is fitting. The creatures who build with hexagons, decide by quorum, and shape queens through chemistry do not ask for much. Just flowers. Just safe places to land. Just seasons allowed to unfold naturally. And in return, they offer the quiet continuity of life. The hum continues. The flowers bloom. The earth breathes. And somewhere in a field not far away, a bee lifts from a blossom, carrying pollen, carrying possibility. Moving gently through the air as the world continues its slow turning beneath the sun. As the sun lowers and the air cools, the hum that once filled the meadow begins to fade. One by one, bees return to their hive, their legs dusted in gold, their wings worn gently by the day's labor. Inside the warm chamber of wax and shadow, they settle into stillness. And if you could shrink yourself small enough to enter that space, you would see it all at once. The hexagon stretching outward like a field of quiet stars. The queen resting at the center, shaped by chemistry. The workers surrounding her, guided by neural sparks and shared purpose. The wax walls built by instinct and physics. The decisions made not by command, but by consensus. A million small lives moving together as one steady rhythm. It is easy to think of intelligence as something loud, something grand, something reserved for minds that reflect and speak. But here, in the dark warmth of a hive, intelligence hums without ego. It flows through scent trails and dances, through shared heat and shared labor, through molecules that shape destiny and geometry that shapes space. And outside the hive, the earth continues its turning. Flowers open in quiet anticipation. Trees wait for pollen to arrive. Fruit swells slowly with the promise of seed. The work of bees threads invisibly through forests, farms, orchards, and wild meadows. Their presence is subtle, but their absence would echo loudly. And yet they ask for so little. A patch of flowers. A place to build. A season allowed to unfold. As you rest now, imagine that field in twilight. The sky deepening to indigo. The last bee gliding toward home, wings catching the final light. Inside its tiny brain, patterns flicker and settle. Inside the hive, warmth gathers and holds. No speeches. No applause. Just continuity. Just life supporting life. Perhaps there is something profoundly calming in that thought, that even the smallest creatures carry worlds within them. That a brain smaller than a raindrop can navigate by the sun. That wax warmed by bodies can become perfect geometry. That consensus can form without conflict. That the earth is sustained not only by grand forces, but by gentle ones. The hum softens. The hive breathes. The meadow grows still. And somewhere beneath the quiet intelligence of bees continues. Unseen, steady, ancient. As your own breath slows now, you might imagine yourself drifting like pollen on a warm current of air, carried softly across a golden field, landing gently among the flowers. Nothing urgent. Nothing rushed. Just rhythm. Just balance. Just the soft understanding that life, in all its complexity, often rests upon the smallest wings. And with that image held lightly in your mind, you can let the hum fade into silence. Let the meadow darken. Let the hive rest. And let yourself drift, carried gently into sleep, as the earth turns quietly beneath the stars.